golden sand sparkling brightly in the yellow summer sun, and playful waves lap at the shore, making peaceful noises, drawing. Jump into the warm waters and splash. You'll be having fun in a flash.
Like most of the segregated South during the Civil Rights era, African Americans faced racial discrimination in Biloxi, Mississippi, which included segregated beaches. These beaches became the battleground for the first civil rights protest in Mississippi when Dr. Gilbert Mason led the responsibility to organize protests that became known as the Biloxi Beach Wade-Ins. These series of protests gave birth to other civil rights milestones, including the desegregation of the Biloxi school system and the 1968 federal court ruling opening the beaches to all citizens.
Slavery technically ended in the South on January 3, 1865, with the Emancipation Proclamation, but blacks were not really free. In 1896, the Plessy v. Ferguson decision led to separate but equal, which separated African Americans from their Caucasian counterparts in public facilities. Separate but equal turned into a racial caste system called Jim Crow laws, which did not allow interracial marriage and ordered business owners and public institutions to keep their black and white clientele separated. There were separate water fountains, restaurants, and schools.
Biloxi, Mississippi was no different than the rest of the South in its enforcement of Jim Crow laws. However, Jim Crow justice also gave property owners more rights by law than the actual laws. In Biloxi, residential houses were placed across the street from Biloxi Beach. These houses were handed down from generation to generation by affluent white property owners. These property owners felt that the property and the beach across the street from the property belonged to their families. They felt that they had the right to decide who could access their family beachfront. By law, African Americans were not allowed on the beach. However, the people in Biloxi did not follow that law. Officers would not allow African Americans on the beach because the homeowners in front of the beach called it their private property.
Some of the South was changing. 1954, Brown v. Board of Education. 1955, Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. 1957, Little Rock 9. Although the civil rights movement was in full force in many different parts of the segregated South, the movement had not yet made its way to the stubborn state of Mississippi. In Biloxi, almost everything was still segregated. Segregated schools, segregated shops, segregated restaurants, and even segregated beaches. However, Dr. Gilbert Mason Sr. was about to take the responsibility to make a change.
Born in Jackson, Mississippi on October 7, 1928, Mason was educated in public schools. He pursued a Doctor of Medicine degree at Howard University in Washington, D.C., but moved back to his home state to begin his medical career. In 1955, he moved with his wife and one-year-old son to Biloxi and established a medical practice. In Biloxi, he volunteered with many community organizations. He also helped form many coastal organizations in Biloxi and Harrison County, including the Gulf Coast chapter of the NAACP. Many African Americans in Biloxi and the surrounding area were wary of joining the NAACP because of the possible repercussions from the white community. As a result, initial membership and participation were better in the Biloxi Civic League and the Harrison County Civic Action Committee than in the NAACP.
Mississippi's first noted civil rights disobedience splash took place on Thursday, May 14, 1959, when 9 black citizens of Biloxi, Mississippi, ventured onto a forbidden spot on a 26-mile-long segregated beach in open and conscious defiance of Mississippi's Jim Crow practices. Dr. Gilbert Mason was a part of this first wade-in, with more yet to come. After about 30 minutes, the Biloxi police stopped the peaceful protest and brought in all 9 citizens, charged with trespassing onto what the police called private property. This foiled protest didn't stop Mason from planning future protests, and with the help of family and friends from the local church, he was able to draw attention to the segregation of the beaches.
On April 24, 1960, the wade-in, later remembered as Bloody Sunday, was the most attended and the most violent wade-in to date. A terrible race riot occurred when 40 to 50 African Americans attempted to swim off the Mississippi Gulf Coast beaches in Biloxi and Gulfport. It was scheduled to start at 1 p.m., right after church. Dr. Gilbert Mason got into his car and was riding to the meeting point of the wade-ins when he was greeted by chaos as he witnessed angry whites attacking the civil rights activists with sticks, chains, carjacks, clubs, pool cues, and wire cable fashioned to an 18-inch long whip. The assault began what the New York Times called the worst race riot in Mississippi history. As the commotion continued, the Biloxi officers stood by, watching the chaos unfold. A deputy came up to Mason and told him he would have to go to jail, but Mason simply said he would go to jail after he was finished sewing up the people who were injured on the beach. 15 African Americans sustained serious injuries. Surprisingly, the deputy took his promise and left him to help his brave yet injured friends. After he was finished, he dutifully reported to jail and was immediately bailed out by the African Americans from his church.
The violence continued into the night, with 2 white men and 8 black men suffering gunshot wounds. On April 25, 1960, 2 firebombs were thrown into the office of Dr. Gilbert Mason in response to his leadership of the Wade-Ins the day before that resulted in a bloody riot. One firebomb burned itself out. When the other exploded, neighbors quickly put out the flames. After the riots that had occurred as a result of the Wade-Ins in April 1960, the black community in Biloxi tested a different tactic, boycotting several white-owned businesses instead of planning future Wade-Ins. Specifically, the group targeted the Borden Milk Company, a large drugstore on Howard Avenue, and a general food and variety store on the corner of Nixon and Division Streets. The drugstore fired 6 black employees after the beach boycott, but it sustained enough business from the white community to survive. The white-owned General Food and Variety Store, however, was put out of business after Biloxi African Americans refused to shop there. The Borden Milk Company fired A. Dickey, a participant in the beach boycotts. The boycott put Borden out of business in Biloxi. On May 17, 1960, the Justice Department filed suit in the United States District Court to force equal access of the 26-mile beach of the Mississippi Gulf Coast for all races.
Ethel Rainey Clay was a 17-year-old high school student when she helped bring change to Biloxi in 1960. During the same time, Dr. Mason and wife, Natalie, petitioned the Biloxi School Board on behalf of their son, Gilbert Jr. They wanted the Biloxi schools to be integrated because African American children did not have the choice to attend white public schools. White public schools received more state funds, offered better education, and more classes such as art, music, and physical education.
Violence in their peaceful protests didn't stop them from planning another Wade-In. Little did they know, this would be the final Wade-In before everything changed. On June 12, 1963, Medgar Evers was assassinated in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi. Just 2 weeks after his death, the final Wade-In was held. The beachgoers placed a double row of black flags on the beach in his honor. 71 people went into the water. Dr. Gilbert Mason and Dr. Felix Dunn of Gulfport led the protesters to the beach. From the shore, 2,000 angry whites watched. This was different from the Wade-In of 1960. The event was organized with the cooperation of the new mayor, Danny Geis, whom newly registered African American voters helped put into office, and he demanded a peaceful demonstration, which the officers duly supervised. Mason recalled this event in his book, Beaches, Blood, and Ballads. "We swam, played ball, and milled around for 40 minutes or so. But homeowners complained about the protesters, so they are arrested for trespassing and later convicted. The arrests allowed them to get the issue into court."
After the final 1963 Wade-In, some positive changes started happening in Biloxi. On August 31, 1964, Biloxi's public schools were integrated through freedom of choice desegregation. It was the first act of desegregation in Mississippi. No school-based incidents occurred in Biloxi as a result of the desegregation of education. On August 16, 1968, Judge J.P. Coleman ruled that the Mississippi Gulf Coast beaches were public property, available for the use by all citizens. This court victory opened Harrison County's 26-mile beach to African Americans.
Since the Wade-Ins, Biloxi has become a growing tourist destination for all people. Its beaches have remained public property thanks to the efforts of Dr. Gilbert Mason. Today, 18% of people living on the Mississippi Gulf Coast work in the tourism industry. Numerous hotels, casinos, and restaurants are now open to all people, regardless of their skin color.
Although once a segregated battleground, the Biloxi Beach is now big business, thanks to Dr. Gilbert Mason for taking the responsibility to secure rights of all races to enjoy the beach.